So hello everyone, happy Friday. I hope your Friday is fantastic. Our weather has turned positive for the day, super warm. I hope it's the same for you there. We had storms and high winds yesterday. Tomorrow, storms, high winds, and a chance of tornadoes, just in case we were in danger of having great weather around here. So, this is Beekeeping Frequently Asked Questions number 18, beginning with bees. And today is Friday the 24th of May. So we are coming up on the end of May. I'm kind of tired of still getting freezing temperatures, but hopefully no more frost. Everything's planted as of yesterday. I planted an acre of wildflowers. We have the Maximilian sunflowers, which are going to provide late pollen and nectar for the bees. We're expanding that. And so this is the time of year for you too, unless you're down in Australia. You're going into winter down there. And thanks for watching all the way from the other side of the world, by the way. But we're in planting season now, so we're thinking about things to put in around here and what's good for the bees. So I like to set things up so they cascade through the year so we can avoid a summer dearth if that's possible. And one of the things I thought about this spring, we talked about planting things around the bee yard that could also serve as windbreak, but also feed the bees. So this spring, this is really interesting because I hadn't paid close attention to the holly bushes. So we have holly bushes around my back deck, and the bees were not going after my cherry trees for some reason. And then I looked close, and you walked by the holly bushes, you could hear all the holly hum, and that's because the bees were in there getting nectar, and it was amazing. The holly flowers, although they're very small and white and turn into later red berries, of course, that the birds use, even bluebirds and robins will eat those berries in early spring when they show up. So the bushes have a great range of utility associated with them. The nectar that constantly oozes out in the flowers, so for example, as the honeybees visit that flower and they get the nectar off of it, they fly on to the next ones and so on. But guess what? More nectar comes out in the same flower. So the plant guarantees pollination this way. They get multiple visits from bees, so all the pollinators were on it, even wasps. So holly bushes are on my list, and I just ordered a pile of them because I'm going to expand. I think we already have discussed in the past that we get early pollen from some of the willow varieties, and that worked great this year. But the hedge is sparse. They're pretty thin, and you could think about evergreens because evergreens are, they're foliated through the year. They collect snow, they break the wind, but so do holly bushes, and holly bushes are evergreens as well. So I'm going to plant a second row from my Salix discolor, which is, of course, the early pollen. Now we're going to have a great windbreak slant nectar resource for the bees. Some people even get holly honey. If you're getting holly honey and you've got enough plants to do that, there are holly trees, of course. I'm talking about the holly bushes. And I'm in agricultural zone 4, and I'm located in the United States, the northeastern United States. It gets very cold here. We are in the snow belt. We have set record snow in the past. Thank goodness we did not set any records this year. But so holly bushes are new on my list for planting. And of course, the wildflower meadow that I mentioned, hopefully that will bloom. All perennials, of course, they'll reseed through the year and come up from the roots. And those Maximilian sunflowers, look them up. Fantastic. Those, of course, will spread out on their own, and they grow 8 feet tall, multiple blooms. How do you know if a flower is providing a lot of nectar or just a little nectar for the bees? You can tell by how long the honeybee spends pollinating it. So when a honeybee lands on a blossom, this is critical for somebody like me who's trying to video or photograph the bees. They land and they take off and land and take off, and they just jump flower to flower to flower to flower, which makes that very hard, which makes getting a honeybee photo or video sequence on that flower very challenging, but also exceptional when you do get it. So there's a bonus to that. But if they're spending a long time on one blossom, and that bee is spending a lot of time poking its tongue deep into that blossom, getting nectar, that means there's lots of nectar there. So when you see bees really parked on a plant for a long time, it's getting a lot of resources. If they're skipping and spending little time, of course, the plant's very dry. And early rains this year are going to result in very good nectar flows. So I'm optimistic about that. Even though we've had terrible winds and storms and everything else, my house is still smashed up for the hailstorm that we received, my whole west side. I'm waiting for a contractor to come and fix that, but you don't care about that. Let's get right into these questions. The very first question, I mentioned in the past that someone should publish a beekeeping journal, a diary type journal, so we could keep all of our stuff together, plan your bee year, and have a historical document that serves to remind you of what you did when. I know you're working small scale. All these talks are centered around people that are keeping bees in their backyard. We're non-commercial. I've decided not to publish one, and I didn't find anybody else who'd really published anything that I liked. So what I'm going to do is just show you what I came up with. So let's treat it like a school journal. This is a Mead zippered folder. This thing is, why is it red? Because it was the cheapest one on Amazon. The different colors, I don't know why, but the different colors cost different amounts. Anyway, so I also got 4 colors of pens for color coding my entries, red, blue, green, and black, of course. And I'm going to show you what's cool about this thing. It has a whole loose leaf filing section built into it. So all your licenses, your apiary inspection forms, and things like that can go in here. My poultry technician license is in here. My apiary registration is in there. So that's great, loose leaf storage. And I'm going to put the list of everything in the video description so that you can see where and what I got. This is the student assignment book. This begins in August of 2019 and goes through 2020. This is just a student book. You know what's great about this? Student assignment book. So as I've already filled out in here, of course, this is my Fred's Fine Fowl and Honeybees, my Department of Ag beekeeper ID numbers here, the apiary license numbers here, my poultry technician license number is here. So this is where, instead of filling it out as a student, you fill it out, of course, as your bee record. So you'll put all your pertinent information, including hopefully emergency phone numbers, like your Department of Agriculture, if you need to get a hold of that inspector because you got something weird going on. But again, I'm going to put the link down here, but what I really liked, there are assignment forms here. So instead of an assignment, maybe it's something that you're doing with your bees. Are you feeding your bees? What are you feeding? Which hives are you feeding? And how's that working out? Also, when you source your feed and get your receipts and everything, you can put them in these document protectors. These are all my origination papers for the bees that I bring in and the queens. And any pertinent documents that you want, just slide them into the document protectors. That way you don't have to staple them. You don't use a 3-hole punch because the 3-hole binder goes right into the document protector itself. And you're good to go. I don't need to show you all of this, but it holds a lot of them. So aside from keeping an assignment book, which also, of course, has the calendar entries, this is going to be fantastic because even though you only have a handful of bees or a handful of hives, it's very easy to forget where you bought the hive, where you got that medication from. If you're medicating or treating your bees, it's going to be critical. How productive was the hive? How old is the queen? Where did you get the queen? Did you mark her? Did you clip her wings? You know, things like that. You'll be able to document all this stuff. Are you about to do splits? Well, then you're going to mark, for example, that you did the split on Saturday and you removed those brood frames, so you know that by Tuesday or Wednesday you can install a new queen, for example. Or if you're going to let them build and replace their own queens, how did that happen? So as a student book, I think this is great. Just alter everything, of course. This is my book. This is my bee journal now. And of course, the different colored gel pens, very convenient. Keep everything all together in one place. I love it. No, I'm not going to publish one because I found all those components. And again, those will be in the video description, but that's how you keep a journal, I think, because then you can tailor it for any part of the world, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. It's just laid out fantastic. And you can grade your own success or failure, because there's parts in there for how you did on the course, how you did on the program, how you did on the lesson. So that's great. That's what I'm doing. I'm not going to publish a beekeeping journal. The next one, second question from Dale Penn. Best beehives and how many? I am a newbie, he says. Okay, well, this whole series is for people that are just starting out. Maybe you have your hives already. A lot of people this time of year are installing their packages, their nucleus bees, and they're getting going. Some people are collecting swarms because it's also swarm season. Also, thank you to all of you who have been writing in to tell me about the Swarm Trooper swarm traps that they put out and those that have been collecting them. Some of them have gotten multiple swarms in the exact same spot. So when you get your swarm trap out and you catch some swarms, make sure and put that right back in there. But as far as beehives, here's the thing. I get a lot of questions about Apimaye insulated plastic hives. Have you tried them? Everyone wants me to try a bunch of different things, and I'm kind of at my limit on that right now. I'm not going to try the plastic hives. I do have the Flow Hive Original, the Flow Hive 2, which has the bottom grate in it, the back venting and the feet and things like that. And now the Flow Hive 2 expanded version, which is a 10-frame Langstroth match up with the 7 flow frames in it. And of course the smaller Flow Hive 2 has the 6 flow frames in it. Those are expensive, so for those of you who have a limited budget, you're not going to want to get a Flow Hive. You're going to go into usually the Langstroth Basic Hive. And we have both. Obviously when I first started out, the Flow Hive didn't exist. We back in 2007, I started with Langstroth boxes and I still use them. And that probably is for beginners, if you're on a budget, as I mentioned before. For beginners, that's the standard anymore, because all over the world they're using Langstroth boxes. Now there are others, there are horizontal hives now. There's a whole movement where you just take the standard frames and now you're just running it all horizontal, so you don't have to lift boxes and things like that. When you're a backyard beekeeper, you can do anything. The rules are that your hive has to be inspected, that the portions of your hive have to be inspectable. So you can't just close up a box, put a bunch of frames in it, or get an old log, for example, and just keep wild honeybees. Some people ask about that all the time. If you're managing the bees, they have to be accessible for inspection, and you want them to be accessible because you want to get in there. So if we're talking about a hive that has compatible equipment across the board, compatible frames, compatible bottom boards, inner covers. There are feeders that are designed for 10-frame and 8-frame Langstroth boxes. If you want the maximum compatibility of equipment, feeders, everything, it's going to be the Langstroth box. And then your only decision is going to be the types of bottom boards and things like that. Again, you have more choices when you choose a Langstroth basic design. And they're widely available. Dedant, BetterBee.com, Mann Lake is taking over the bee supply world. So if you want the most versatile hive at the lowest price point, it's going to be standard Langstroth hives. And the cheapest bottoms are going to be those that are solid bottoms generally. There are a lot of integrated pest management designs to consider. But when you're just starting out, the question also here was, what design and how many to have. You always want at least 2 hives when you're starting out. You don't want all your eggs in one basket, as they say, because you want to compare the performance and behaviors of the hives, and you can't do that when you have just one. So even when I first started out, the state inspector is the one that suggested that I keep my own bees so I could leave him alone and stop following him around everywhere he went. And so I set up 2 hives, and it's important to do that because you might have one hive that's a profound failure. They may not be performing well at all. There might be problems. If you can't compare good and bad, it's kind of like triage. Medical people, you want to find something wrong with someone's leg or arm, you grab both legs and work your way up and feel everything, and then you're matching up symptoms. Same thing with the arms, and you're looking for symmetry. Well, it's the same in the bee yard. If this hive is doing fantastic and this hive over here is doing terribly, then you wouldn't know that if this was the only colony you had. You just assume, they just don't do much. They're not performing very well. Oh, the flow hive is no good because the bees never get up in there and never fill those frames. Oh, but they do over here. Identical environment, identical resources. Bees perform differently, even from the same genetic stock. We're going to talk a little bit about that today too. But when it comes to the beehives and the equipment, and you want maximum compatibility and the lowest prices, then you're going to probably want to start out with the Langstroth hive. Now, what if people want to get into flow hives later? A flow hive runs you anywhere from $600 to $800, depending on which one it is. That's a lot of money. That's the price point of 2 standard Langstroth full hive kits right there. So if you start off with Langstroth, you're okay, because let's say you are successful. Wow, the bees are doing great. I love beekeeping. I'm ready to sink more money into it. And you don't want to walk out into a bee graveyard and just be out of the bee business your first year, which can happen. A bear comes through and ruins you. Anyway, you can later add just a flow hive super. So you can just put the top box on, which has those flow frames in it, right onto a Langstroth box. And they have upper supers by the Flow Company that match the 8 frame or the 10 frame. They're exactly a 1/4 inch off in width. So the Flow Hive boxes are a 1/4 inch smaller than the standard Langstroth boxes. I don't know why that is, they just are. So you can add them later, it's not a total loss. You'll see in my bee yard, when I show videos of it, that some of my bottom boxes are Langstroth boxes, and then you get up into the upper boxes and the Flow Supers, and they are Flow Hive Supers. So you can go either way as you decide based on your early experience with beekeeping. Do you want to keep, raising bees? Is it a good thing for you? Did your neighbors freak out and now you're facing a contested apiary where, you're actually going against the grain to keep your bees? So there are lots of reasons to test the water first. I do encourage you not to adopt someone else's used equipment. If you're going to bring in beehives and you're just getting started, there is a huge advantage in using the same style and design of hives as your bee mentor, the membership in your bee club, for example, beekeepers associations. They're predominantly using one specific type of equipment, and that way everyone shares about it. They share equipment. Don't buy in the used stuff. The only way you should be bringing in used equipment, hives, bottom boards, frames, everything else into your apiary is if it's currently occupied by a healthy colony of bees. So then you know that they're doing okay. But a lot of people, they come into spring like this past year. Some people lost 100% of their beehives this spring. There are other new beekeepers that I know that lose their hives every year completely. The very idea that they want to continue with bees is amazing to me because it's so devastating. All your bees are dead. So what's the first thing they think they want to do? If they want to get out of beekeeping, one really talented chef in our area got into beekeeping over the last couple of years, lost his bees, but also found out that he has a heightened sensitivity to bee stings. So he has to get rid of everything. Well, now he's trying to get rid of unoccupied hives that had die-outs in them. So, not to set that guy up for failure when he's trying to get rid of his equipment, but if you're bringing home somebody else's gear, especially when there's a die-out, you don't know why those bees failed. There are pathogens that last a long time. I'm not a big fan of just flaming it out and going through all these sterilization processes. You're much better either buying a colony that's occupied by bees from someone, because if I get an overloaded apiary and I put a bunch of swarms in my boxes, I'll start looking for someone that's just starting out, that's promising, that's serious about it, maybe to give them at a very low price a colony of bees, and then I just replace that with a new innovative hive that I'm working with. So I recycle my beehives in this way. Don't buy empty equipment. So that's kind of my answer. There are so many, the Warre hive method and stuff, that's a lot of people are looking at that as a holistic way to manage bees. Again, you have to make sure that you can meet the requirements of your inspection for your state and registration and things like that, and have the ability to inspect and access every part of your hive. So there are a lot of things that come into play. But those are just the basics for you. I would recommend Langstroth for starting. Unlimited budget, go ahead and start right off with a flow hive. Which flow hive should you get? Because now there are there's the Flow Hive Basic, there's the Flow Hive 2, which has its own self-leveling stands. They've got the threaded feet on them, and it has integrated pest management, and then you've got the Flow Hive 2 10-frame version. And I'll put a link to that. If you want to get one of those, I can give you $50 off with a link in the video description. If you use that link and you buy a Flow Hive component, I get $50 towards another FlowHive component myself. So we're helping each other if you do that. So if you've got deep pockets and you want to put the fanciest beehive you can find out in your garden, the FlowHive 2 10 frame is what I recommend. So Langstroth, basics, beginnings. If you're ready to spend the big bucks, you want to put a piece of beekeeping furniture in your garden, because that's kind of what it looks like. It's really nice cedar. You know, the details are fantastic now. They've advanced a lot in just the last 3 years. FlowHive came out in 2015. I implemented mine in 2016, and now it's my favorite. I have FlowHive standing by to go out in my garden now, as soon as I replace some of the older woodenware. So budget plays too. Yeah, that's it. That's all I'm going to say about that, I think. So thanks for that question, Dale. I hope I answered it. If not, if any of you have questions, please write down in the comment section below the video what your questions are. Remember, we're beginning beekeeping. I'm getting a lot of questions recently from commercial beekeepers. I was offered money to go and serve as a consultant to help people set up a commercial operation. That is not my area of expertise at all. I'm not a number cruncher. I'm not going to be able to work out how you're going to be able to be successful with 500 beehives and starting a commercial operation. I recommend you partner with other commercial beekeepers, but then don't expect them to be warm and fuzzy to you, because you're going to be competing with them. So here's the next one. JD. Okay, he said that I mentioned in one of my other videos that there was a problem with rain protection even from the gabled hive roofs when it comes to the landing board, because as you stack your hives taller, the hive cover, even if it sticks way out, is not going to protect your landing board from rain. So what's the point? Is that important? I mean, what should we do? And so I mentioned that you could put a landing board visor or rain shield over that landing board to protect those bees if you really want to keep them from getting water on them when they're landing, or from that landing board being soaked or even covered in snow. So what did I do? I built a prototype. So this is my rain visor. This is very simple. It doesn't get any more basic than this. And of course, I'm going to put the hardware parts down in the video description. I just use these little wing screws. These are 1/4 threaded, and I believe this is 1.5 inches. All I did was cut these at 30 degrees. This is obviously rough cut pine that I used. And then I clamped and glued these side pieces on, also cut them at 30 degrees. And then I installed metal grommets here, like this one right here. And that way your threaded twist goes through. This goes right on the front of the hive, like I've shown over here, which you might have seen earlier, but I'm also going to show it videos off to the sides here while we're talking about it. But this does a very good job of covering your landing board. Now that's for snow or rain. Of course, you want to put a finish on it. This is completely unprotected. It's just going to get waterlogged. I used Titebond 2. Titebond 3 is waterproof if you want to use that. So I clamped and glued that up, and I also put a stainless steel screw just to be sure, because we're going to put, a tension load on this. It's going to be strained. And then all you have to do is turn these screws, and it locks right onto the side of your hive. Now the advantage is this can go anywhere on your beehives. If you've got 3 or 4 boxes, or you want this a foot off the landing board or 6 inches off the landing board, you can do that. Plus, when there's a sudden rain that comes in, your bees that are on the landing board, not only are they not being hammered by the rain, sometimes bees hang out on the face of the hive, and they would be able to do that up underneath of this, completely protected. So this is a very simple thing. Yesterday, I went out in the wood shop there, and I made 6 of these. So I'm going to put these out on my beehives, and we're going to see how that goes, just for fun. Is it necessary? I don't really think so. When you're setting your beehives up, here's the back of the beehive, here's the front, here's the landing board. You always want to slightly tilt your beehives towards the landing board. If you get torrential rains, as we have had here recently, then you want that to run down the face of the hive and then run off. Now, in the video sequences that I show up on the side while I'm talking about this, there's some rain dripping down on the landing board that actually comes from the cover that's on the beehive. So the covers really don't extend out far enough to significantly protect a landing board unless it's a single box. And even then, when you have a single deep and then you have the cover right there, then the cover is only going to go out so far and it's still going to drip down onto your landing board. So putting a rain visor on like that, what are the dimensions? This just matches the front of your beehive, the front width. And so when you're cutting this piece of wood, give yourself 1/8 of an inch beyond the physical width of the front of the box that you're going to do. So for an 8 frame or a 10 frame. And that way you'll have room and you can just tighten it up with these screws. So it doesn't have to be a critical dimension width-wise, but you do want to have enough space so you're not having to really wrench this on there. So you decide what your tolerances are going to be. The other thing is how thick should it be front to back. Again, it's totally up to you. This is very low tech, so you can make these any size you want. I didn't find that I needed any more space than this to clamp it. If you run it a little farther back, of course, you can use more wood if you want to. You can also, create another little point because these come to an edge. The water will drip off of this and not follow back. Having it at an angle, I would not run a canopy that runs straight out because then everything just sits on it, and when the snow melts, it'll still seep between this and go down the front of your hive. So I think an angle is good. 30 degrees. How did I come up with 30 degrees? I just felt like it. I didn't. 45 degrees is too extreme. 30 degrees seemed about right and gives me the coverage. And we're going to see how that goes. It's going to be fun. But I think I think that's a good thing. Now, this happened to one of the beekeepers in my association. I think last year he was noticing that there's a lot of snow on the landing board, the entry is being plugged up a lot, and on a day when bees were foraging, bees were flying, he installed some kind of visor over that entry. And then what happened was, as the end of the day came, he looked at his beehive and there were a whole bunch of bees clustered on top of this in the snow. And they died there because underneath was the actual entry. But while the foragers were out, he put this visor on, and that changed the configuration of the beehive. So when those foraging bees, this is my guess as to what happened to them. As the bees came back, they saw this new rooftop there just above the entrance as the landing board. They landed on it and then just could not find the entry to the hive. So don't put something like this in the middle of winter. And if you could put it on at night, after your bees are all in the hive, or you want to put this on as I did, early in the morning, then as the foragers come out, they're going to see this configuration. Now here's another way to distinguish physically your beehives, so that as the bees are coming in, if you have different shapes of awnings or, what I call rain visors on your beehives, that will help them physically orient to their parent colony structure. So it's just another way to distinguish one hive from another. I did not put them side by side, so we're going to see how that goes, but that's fun. And I appreciate that question, by the way, from JD, who, by the way, Jay, you sent me a pile of questions. Thank you for these. Since most of Jay's questions are relevant to flow hives specifically, and I know that there are people that don't want to hear about flow hives for whatever reason, I'm going to do a separate video where we're going to talk exclusively, it's going to come out this week, we're going to talk exclusively about flow hives and answer some of those questions relevant to them. That way we won't be wasting your time if you're not interested in those. But thank you, Jay, for that question. I already talked about holly bushes for bee yards, and Thinless is the name of the person that posted this question. Do you have any hives that have survived for many years? Yeah, if your hives don't die out every spring, they're surviving for more than a year. This is relevant, and here's why. When you are starting off with bees, Hopefully you did it with 2 colonies. Some people get very excited about having a new colony of bees and they want to expand right away. So I caution you about, because you're in an area, like for me, it's in the cold. I have an area where my bees have to kind of adapt to the area. I want to see what bees survive the cold. I have lost in the past as much as 100%. In the winter of 2007, I lost every single hive I had due to the cold, the wind. It was terrible, and I didn't know enough to strap down my beehives, and I came home from work one day, and all the hives, all of them, were laying in the snow, and the boxes were all separated. The bees were all exposed in the worst possible weather. So that was a learning experience. So what happened? I replaced them with packaged bees. So then you think about, well, I can just get, so many packaged bees, nucleus bees, whatever, and then I can split them as they become stronger. So here's the thing. To answer the question, yes, I have bees that last, my queens last 3 years or more, unless they get superseded or unless they swarm out and I requeen. Now, would I pull genetic stock and splits from a colony that I just got this year? Could I? Sure. If they built up strong and I have all this brood frame, I could pull brood frames and I could make a split and I could put a new queen in there, or I could let them make their own queen if there's open brood on those frames. Now remember, this is basic beekeeping. So I just want to get the logic in your thinking process when it comes to what queens should you be reproducing your stock from. So for me, I have this tiger colony. I call them the super colony, whatever. They do great. They're out by my spruce tree. This thing still has 3 or 4 boxes on it, way ahead of everyone else. The queen in that colony is going on her 3rd year. So the fact that the colony is so robust that the queen has been going for 3 years, that's my breeding stock. I don't want to breed from a queen that has not been proven in my geographic zone, that hasn't proven herself to be cold hardy, that hasn't proven herself to show longevity as a productive queen. So I wait until they're at least 2 years old before I do any breeding and splitting from that colony. So I want those genetics, and I don't want an untested queen to be my reproductive stock. So if you've got a queen that's a year old or under a year old and you're thinking, wow, this is great, I'm going to reproduce all my bees from that queen and I'm going to feed them and I'm going to boost them and I'm going to really get them to generate massive numbers of bees in that colony just so I can, make them prolific and stock my yard with them. That's a risk, and you're not doing any favors to the genetics, because we want to breed. If you have 3 queens in your bee yard and you want to pick from the top performing ones, it's the same with my chickens. If that hen is not a great egg layer, if that rooster is not highly fertile and very productive and has good physical structure and everything else, I don't want to breed from that bird. I mean, I could breed from a rooster that's 6 months old, but I don't know how awesome he's going to be, how well he's going to look when he's fully developed. It's much the same with bees. You only want to breed from your strongest, most resilient, most productive stock, and you want to breed from a 1.5 year queens. They have to have at least gone through a full year, a full cycle, and still proven that they're making it. Because you don't know, their stock might not hold up to Varroa or other challenges, Nosema and everything else. So don't breed from newbies, and try to keep your stock as long as you can and select those that are doing the best. I don't know what's really behind this question. I took it as an opportunity to explain to you about genetics and breeding, just from a very basic level. Oldest, healthiest, most productive, that's your stock. Those that are still in their 1st year that are unproven, I would not be splitting and breeding and expanding from those bees. And now the hives have lasted many years. I've had hives that have been occupied constant for 8 years, but that's not all one queen. They recycle, so they, swarms emerge from that colony, and I've requeened them, and I'm going to be requeening this coming week. So I'm going to be hand selecting some brood that I like, from stock that is great, and I'm going to put new queens in those. We're going to get those out and separate them for 3 days. In fact, I was told by my wife today that I need to look at splitting hives tomorrow in preparation for the arrival of the new queens. So, there's the flow hive thing. Is that the end of all my questions? I can't believe that. I guess that's it. So if you have questions and you'd like me to address something, or you'd like to see something up close, you want to see some bee behavior, let me know. I may have stock video for that. I'd be happy to answer your questions, of course. We're getting into the full swing of the nectar flow where I live, while down in Australia, those of you who are there that are watching, you're going into the cold weather period and maybe even a dearth. I don't know what your winters are like down there. But we're coming into the best possible time of year. My fruit trees, the apple blossoms are almost gone by already, and the bees barely visited them. My cherry trees, the bees barely touched them. We have native pollinators all over, but my honeybees are finding stuff somewhere, and I don't even know, other than these holly bushes recently, I don't know what they're finding. The dandelions are about gone by already. And so the next thing that's going to come up is going to be clover for me. So white clover is going to come up. Some alfalfa will follow that. So we're getting into a really good nectar flow. So here's my advice for you beginning in your first year. If you're going to be pulling honey from your beehives and you're going to consume that honey, do not continue feeding your bees. Now, if you've got a brand new package that you installed, or you've got nukes that you're trying to build up and you're not going to draw honey off of those, you can't continue to feed sugar syrup, for example. All of the essential oil mixes, Honeybee Healthy, Pro Health, Brood Booster, all of that stuff says right on it, not for human consumption. And they also say, remove honey supers. So you don't want essential oils going into your honey that you're going to extract and consume. So those are, my cautionary things. Get the feeders off if you're going to harvest the honey. If you're just building the colony, you're going to let them build through the year, and you're not going to take their honey, you can keep your feeders on. I have, as you know, if you've been watching my series, we have 3 packages that are still out there, and the feeders are still on them. But as the nectar flow kicks in, their numbers are building fast. As the nectar flow kicks in, and as I see their numbers rise, I'm going to take those feeders off completely. So the feeder shims will serve as upper vents after that. So again, your questions are welcome. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this program. And those of you who are driving and listening, thank you for sharing that you do that, because that's interesting to me that on your Friday commute home from work, you're listening to this video presentation as a podcast of sorts. So if there's something you want to hear about, something you want me to talk about or share visually, you want to see a video, let me know. Be glad to do it. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.